Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about the conclusion of the original Wildstar Sky Zero miniseries with Wildstar number 4. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in November of 1993, we see here on the cover Wildstar flying through space with a sort of corporeal image of, I'm assuming Jumpstart, but possibly Skylark? I'm not sure. But overall, I feel like this is a pretty decent cover, and it's eye-catching enough to get people to want to grab it off the shelf. And also, one would hope they're wanting to grab it off the shelf so they can figure out how this miniseries ends. Al Gordon, co-creator, writer, inker. Jerry Ordway, co-creator, penciler. Ruben Rood, colorist. John Workman, letterer. Bill Bud Shakespeare, editor. Ollie Optics, color separator. The story, of course, picks up exactly where we left off before, with Mickey now being fully engulfed by the Wildstar symbiote as he takes a punch from Deadstar. This, of course, knocks him off his feet, as Deadstar is actually rather powerful and does possess a significant amount of super strength, to the point where Mickey believes that he actually should have been dead, that no one should be able to survive a punch like that. However, Jumpstart explains that the symbiote is protecting him the same way that the star parasite did when Deadstar originally took a shot at him. We also see Blockade jumping through the, porthole or tunnel or whatever that Wildstar and Jumpstart fell through on their way down into the underground facility. And I'm not sure, but I think this might be the first issue that Blockade's name actually gets mentioned, because I can't recall, but I don't think that it was mentioned in the first 3 issues. I could be misremembering that, and if I am, point it out in the comments, but I'm pretty positive this is the first time we actually get to hear his name spoken versus, his appearances in all 3 of the first issues, and we never knew who the heck he actually was. Blockade immediately gets the jump on the 2 of them as he starts to grab Jumpstart and push her away, and then picks Wildstar up with one hand, proving that he also possesses a rather impressive amount of super strength. However, it's assumed that it's probably not as good as Deadstar's, being that Deadstar is in fact the leader of this group, and no one ever seems to really challenge that leadership. Jumpstart tries to counterattack. However, his suit is well insulated enough that her electrical impulse can't get through. Also, I should point out that Jumpstart's powers are discharged specifically through touch, so she can't shoot lightning bolts out of her hand the way that someone like Electro from Spider-Man can. At this point, Blockade then punches Wildstar, knocking him through the air, and then we see that Trans and Mazer suddenly appear, and I think, if I remember correctly, Trans's powers is that he can transmute himself, or I guess transport would be the better, more operative word, himself and anyone else he's touching to any given location. In this case, it's him and Mazer. However, when they appear, they see Wildstar flying through the air at them, and Trans immediately switches places with Mazer, allowing Mazer to take the hit so that he can dodge it. He immediately begins to apologize then and state, "Oh, it was purely a reflex, I'm sorry," which makes you assume that Mazer is actually a lot more powerful than Trans, and Trans doesn't want to face his wrath. Mazer is like, "Oh yeah, I bet it was." And then he states that, that's just the mark of Trans being a huge coward. And at this point, Wildstar, aka Mickey, is like, "Wow, you guys are really a good team, huh?" Kind of making fun of the fact that they all seem to hate each other. Meanwhile, back on the surface, as the military is trying to get their bearings after the fight between Dragon and Wildstar and all of the different, explosions and everything that were happening, the general's trying to rally the troops and get them back into the helicopter, and Dragon is like, "Hey, what the heck is going on here? I need to know what's up." But the general refuses to give him that information, stating that he doesn't have the clearance. One of his subordinates states, "General, we could actually probably use Dragon's help given what we're up against." But the general states, "Oh, no, we don't need his kind of help." Kind of implying some degree of prejudice to, accepting the help of a super being, even though Dragon is an actual police officer. At this point, Dragon's like, well, you're saying that as if I want to be involved in any of this to begin with, which I don't. Good luck on handling this all on your own. I've got a flight to catch, as he immediately walks off, stating, screw the freaking military. I'm tired of dealing with their crap, and I better not miss my flight. Not long afterwards, we see the chopper land next to the quote-unquote house that sits above the secret military underground base. The chopper is then lowered down with a disguised elevator helipad type of thing, I suppose. As we also see Mickey's dad just completely stunned by everything he's looking at, and he asks the general, how on earth did you guys ever manage such a place? The general states that we had help, and Mickey's dad is like, wait a minute, what kind of help? When he's then flabbergasted to see the crazy, huge, green, skeletal cyber Hulk thing that we saw in Michael's vision in issue number 2. The general says, oh, don't worry about that. That's nothing, really. Come on, man, keep your head about you. We got stuff to do. We then see the other general offloading his troops from the helicopter as he states, come on, get a move on. We've got work to do. And as they're all making their way through the facility, Hotwire takes this opportunity to quickly dive off and hide himself, as he's got his own job to do, and he was just using this opportunity to try and gain access to the facility itself. The general then states that, Mickey's dad, Gabriel, doesn't really need to be worried that there couldn't be a safer place anywhere for them to be, as they walk through a door that he enters an encryption code into. Meanwhile, Hotwire finds this same door and tries to access it with his own key card. This, of course, doesn't work as he enters the name Hotwire. He then waits and then enters the word well, and then suddenly the door opens. And this is where we start to realize that Hotwire has some sort of power or ability over computer systems that allow him to essentially hack into and do whatever he wants with literally any system, no matter what level of encryption it has. Back to the fight, we see that Mazer is using his telekinetic powers to give Wildstar the business as he slams him into a wall. And then Freeze Zone decides to also join in on the attack as she begins to fire her freeze beams at Wildstar. Again, I'm not certain if Freeze Zone actually has a parasite the way that so many of the others do, as we still haven't seen her use any actual special powers per se. She just seems to have freeze rays the same way that Captain Cold does. However, she's cut off when Jumpstart tackles her and yells at Mickey to expand his chest to break the ice off. Mickey states, I can barely breathe. At this point, Jumpstart's kind of had enough, and she just throws a standing sidekick into the side of his head and states, you've got to get angry. That's how you get stronger. That's the way the star works. Like we've never heard, anger making you more powerful as a ability multiplier in any other comic. Though I will say this does harken back to Michael's explanation to Mickey earlier that the parasites play off of the emotions of their host and amplify those emotions. At this point, being that he's gotten angered, he flexes all of his muscles and shatters all the ice off of him. However, he's then grabbed by Blockade, who holds him in a bear hug while Dead Star says, we're going to take care of this right now. We're going to end all of this. We need to know where this beacon is. We're going to bring the Roz Plaza here. This has all been for nothing. At this point, Mickey's hurt enough as he punches Blockade in both sides of his head. And as Blockade releases him, he then hits him with a swift kick to the gut, and then a big giant left hook that sends him flying. Also, this is breaking off a lot of his armor. However, realizing that he's distracted, Dead Star decides to use his future ray gun to fire upon Wildstar, knocking him backwards into Blockade, sending the two of them flying through the air. Meanwhile, in another part of the facility, the conversation between Mickey's dad and General Rourke continues, as Mickey tells the general that he's sorry, but the time machine that they found, he can't really make heads or tails of, as some of the programming language and circuitry in it seems to make perfect sense, while the rest of it is all just gobbledygook that seems like it shouldn't do anything at all. The general states, however, that he really needs to figure out how all this works, as at this point, the government has sunk too much time and money into this project to let it just go by the wayside. And, essentially, his job is on the line if they can't figure out how this thing works. He then tells Mickey's dad that also they have this beacon that they don't know exactly what it does. And they really need to try and figure out, what exactly that's all about and what makes it tick. And Mickey's dad says, yeah, sure, if I had some pixie dust, I could probably figure that out. Kind of just making a joke of like, hey man, I can't help you here. The general then tells him, well, we've also got this for you, the package that was delivered to you earlier in the day that we saw back in issue number 1. He hands it to Mickey's dad and states that, your friend Doug wanted to get this to you safely because he couldn't figure out what was going on with it, but he knew it was important. As Mickey's dad opens up the box, he sees that it contains the beacon that they saw on the screen before, but it's glowing green and is giving off of a weird, like, extraterrestrial light. And then suddenly it just disappears and turns into little particles that Mickey's dad refers to as pixie dust. As he holds them in his hand, trying to make heads or tails of the whole situation, a soldier runs up to the general and states, there's been a security breach. We've got to get to all of our security stations. We've got to handle this. When suddenly we see none other than Wildstar, aka Mickey, and Blockade smash through a wall above them and then land on top of the tank that contains the giant cybernetic skull-faced Hulk monster thing. At this point, Jumpstart jumps out of the hole as well, trying to get to Mickey and trying to also evade Deadstar, who's in hot pursuit, opening fire on her. And Mickey wakes up, realizing that he for a moment lost consciousness and is next to this huge giant monster and is like, oh my god, what the hell is even happening? And this seems to be pretty much the worst day of Mickey's life, and it's understandable given everything he's been through since we met up with him back in issue number 1. Meanwhile, in a different part of the facility, we see Hotwire enter a room and find an open computer terminal. He then sits down and cracks his knuckles and starts to access the terminal as it requires an access code. He enters his name again, Hotwire, and the terminal responds by saying that this is the incorrect password and he has 15 seconds to enter the correct login information or a level 1 security breach will be activated. He then responds by just typing in the word please, and the terminal responds by saying excuse me, and then he writes pretty please. At this point, the terminal says, yeah, sure, okay. He then audibly says thanks, and the terminal responds on screen by saying you're welcome. This again playing into whatever it is Hotwire's power is, he seems to just be able to access whatever computer systems he wants with literally nothing stopping him. I don't know if it's directly tied to him entering the Hotwire name, or if it's just a natural ability he has and that's just something he happens to use to gain access. I don't know. It's not really well defined or described here, but again, if there's a computer or any kind of computer system, Hotwire's in with literally no resistance. Meanwhile, back in the fight, we see Wildstar, aka Mickey, starting to get to his feet as Jumpstart rappels down. At this point, Mickey's dad sees Mickey as Wildstar, not realizing that this is his son, and believing that this is the man who took off with his son and wants answers. Meanwhile, General Rourke also recognizes Jumpstart from earlier and says, hey, that's that bimbo from before, we need to get her. Mickey's dad runs up to Mickey, stating, what did you do with my son? And then Mickey responds by saying, Dad, you're here. And this stops him dead in his tracks. We then see two soldiers grab Jumpstart as General Rourke says, let's go ahead and cuff this bimbo. We need to get her, into a cell quick and get all this figured out. Jumpstart, not taking too kindly to being called a bimbo, decides to grab onto General Rourke and shock all three of the men, knocking them off of their feet. At this point, Mickey gets to his feet, tells his dad, don't ask any questions. I don't have time to explain. We need to get the heck out of here. when his dad looks back and sees that something really weird is going on with Blockade and feels like maybe things are getting really, really out of hand. We then see that Blockade's parasite has actually transformed into a giant alien monster creature that has this weird translucent sac in between its legs that contains Blockade's unconscious body. Mickey and his dad obviously have no idea what the heck is happening and are just shocked by what they're looking at. At this point, Jumpstart dives in and tries to tackle the monster, stating that they need to be careful because when Blockade is unconscious, he actually becomes way more dangerous because now his parasite isn't being kept in check. However, before Wildstar can even begin to try and process any of this, he's attacked from behind by the now completely conscious Cyber Skull Hulk monster thing that we saw back in issue 2, who grabs him by the head and slams him up into the wall. Jumpstart tells him to stop clowning around as we see Blockade's parasite starting to overwhelm her and then throw her into his chest cavity and wrap his rib cage around her, essentially. This, of course, is not good for Jumpstart as her electrical powers seem to have really no effect on this creature, and she states that she's going to need some help immediately. She then tells Mickey that in order to stop this, he needs to break Blockade free of this creature's yolk sac, as despite the fact that he's unconscious, his parasite actually still needs Blockade to function properly. Mickey, quick on his feet, decides that he's going to try and use his two foes against each other as he jumps in front of the Blockade monster thing and then taunts the Cyber Skull monster thing into throwing a punch. He then jumps over the monster, which allows the fist of the Skull monster to puncture the yolk sac of the Blockade monster, potentially killing Blockade in the process. I'm not sure. It seems like could possibly be his undoing, as, there wasn't a lot of extra space in there, and he was unconscious and not capable of defending himself against such an attack. This causes a huge explosion of just yolk and potentially blood flying all over the place. It gets all over Deadstar and Mickey's dad. Deadstar is like, gosh, that's disgusting. And then he grabs Jumpstart, who is definitely feeling the effects of the battle at this point, as she seems rather groggy from the whole ordeal. And he states, now it's time to deal with you. However, he's interrupted when Wildstar says, no, I'm the one you're going to be dealing with. At this point, Deadstar throws Jumpstart aside and says, all right, you really want to do this, kid? Let's go. I can see that you're now the one in possession of the star, which means that Michael's bit the dust at this point. However, at this point, Deadstar actually reveals that he was aware that Michael and Mickey are the same person from different points in their lives, and that he's been trying to convince Michael for decades to join him and the rest, and that the future that he's trying to prevent is actually the perfect future for them to live in, and that he doesn't want that future to go away. Of course, Mickey has no intention of trying to stop on his quest and doesn't want to allow a giant world war to knock out most of the world's population. So at this point, Deadstar says, fine, I'm not going to let you stop me in keeping this future from coming to pass, as he jumps over and attacks Wildstar. Meanwhile, we see that Jumpstart on the ground is looking at the general and Mickey's dad being completely outclassed by all these future baddies, and she tries to formulate a way that she can help. So she looks up, notices a high voltage breaker box, and decides that she needs to unleash some real power. So she grabs onto the wires from the breaker box and absorbs all of the electricity from it, which we, at this point, didn't know she could do. However, this takes a pretty big toll on her as we see her fall to the ground in exhaustion. But as she's doing so, she yells at Mickey's dad to get clear of all the baddies and also make sure he's not in any of the liquid on the ground that was spilled from the Cyber Skull monster's tank. She then touches the liquid and unleashes all of the electricity into the baddies, knocking them all unconscious. But she also kind of takes it out of herself at this point as she realizes that that took a lot out of her. And this is where we see her kind of displaying the same level of exhaustion that we saw Michael display when he unleashed his like power blast attack that he used in earlier issues, showing that, you know, while she has this parasite that is increasing her power, it's not unlimited and it comes with a trade-off. Using this moment to try and get some semblance of a plan going, Mickey's dad grabs Jumpstart and tries to pull her to safety, assuming that she's on his side because at this point he's kind of losing track. He then goes to grab the unconscious general and pull him to safety when he's suddenly snuck up on from behind by the Cyber Skull Hulk monster thing, and he realizes that he needs help immediately because he cannot stand up to this monster on his own. Meanwhile, Hotwire is still working on getting information into the terminal that we don't quite understand as of yet, when suddenly his actions are detected by security and he's contacted by one General Shooter, who seems to be rather in the know and in charge, possibly semi in charge of this entire project. He demands to know who the hell is in this system and how they gained access to it, and then suddenly realizes that he's looking at a kid and he can't believe it. Hotwire, of course, says, "Howdy, General, how's it going?" And the General states, "You know, you're in a lot of trouble, kid. We're going to pinpoint your position in a few moments and there's going to be a security team," when he's interrupted by Hotwire stating, "Oh no, I've made sure that there's no backdoor channels that you can use to find my location. I've locked you out of that completely." Then the General, shocked, is like, "How on earth did you ever do this? How could you have figured that out? You would have had to go through, entered like 30 codes to gain access to the mainframe in order to pull that off. And there's no way you could do that. And you'd have to be at a terminal inside one of our," and then he catches himself and says, "blue compounds." And no one has the ability to get into one of those, and no one has all those access codes. However, Hotwire then explains that he is in fact in his new blue facility, and that he and their computer systems have a really close relationship. At this point, the General's not buying any of it, because why would he? He wouldn't ever expect that there's a guy from the future who has special powers that can hack into computer systems, gaining access to everything. And he states, "Well, we're going to find you. We're going to take care of this." But once again, Hotwire interrupts him and states, "Listen, General, I want you to understand, we're wasting time here. And I've given you the edge. And if you're smart, you're going to tell your friends. And I've got a lot riding on you, and I'm counting on you to get all of this done for me. I'm signing off now," as he hits the button and cuts off the transmission, cutting the General off in mid-sentence. And this is where we find out that whatever Hotwire's been up to, it doesn't seem to be along the lines of the same goals that Deadstar and his crew were up to, as he seems to almost be trying to give some sort of aid to the military and potentially the Earth as a whole. Meanwhile, back at the fight, we see that Deadstar and Mickey are locked up in a grappling match, and Deadstar's like, "Listen, kid, I understand you've got the parasite in the suit, but I fought your older self, and I can tell you right now, your younger self doesn't measure up." At this point, Mickey has heard enough and is letting his anger really kind of shine to amplify his power. And he says, "How about you measure this?" as he hits him with a swift knee to the groin and then a huge uppercut that sends him flying through a pipe. He then wastes no time in jumping through the air and grabbing the giant Cyber Skull Hulk monster from behind, trying to get it away from his dad and distract it. But he notices that he feels like his anger is starting to get a little out of control, but he also realizes that it actually feels pretty good, which again is something that Michael warned him about that the symbiote would do, well, the parasite, I should say, would do if he relinquished too much control to it. Realizing that he has to do something to try and end this fight swiftly, he decides to try and use the beam that he saw Michael use earlier, as he smacks his fist into the top of his left wrist and unleashes a power shot into the back of the giant hulking monster. However, he realizes that this may not have been the best course of action, as it suddenly zaps all of his strength and he falls to the ground. Wasting no time, Deadstar realizes that this is his opening as he leaps through the air to tackle Mickey, as we see that the giant Hulk monster is now embedded in one of the walls. Deadstar then chastises Wildstar as he states, "You never were smart when it came to like tactical strategy, and you've spent your entire last paycheck, buddy. You're not going to have what it takes to fight me anymore, and I'm going to make sure that you never have a chance to live long enough to collect your gold watch," making kind of like corporate jokes about, long-term service and whatnot, which seems kind of odd given that Deadstar's from 30 years in the future, so that type of corporate structure thing didn't really exist in his post-apocalyptic world. So the reference kind of doesn't make sense coming from him. As we see Wildstar on the ground being approached by all of the villains, believing that they have the upper hand, the whole thing is suddenly interrupted when Skylark once again reappears. We haven't seen her since the first issue, as she simply screams, "Stop." However, at this point, things start to get really wild as suddenly a bunch of other Wildstar phantoms appear as they all state simultaneously, "What the hell?" along with Mickey, who states, "What the hell?" And Skylark looks down and says, "Oops, I might have really messed up this time." Deadstar is completely confused by all of this and also infuriated as he believes that Michael is dead as he tries to throw a punch. However, his fist goes directly through this phantom Wildstar. Mickey, however, realizes at this point that he can hear all of the thoughts of these other Wildstar phantoms and that they all feel cold, meaning that possibly these are the thoughts of previous dead Wildstars, and that's why it feels so eerie and cold and dead to him, is that it is literally the thoughts of the deceased. One of the phantom Wildstars looks over and sees Mickey and says, "Oh my god, Mickey," as he tries to reach out and touch him, but his hand just passes right through him. And Mickey says, "Michael?" kind of confused by everything that's going on as well. However, Deadstar realizes at this point that Mickey's the key to everything, and if they can get rid of him, then they could potentially end this whole fiasco. He yells to kill him as he points at Wildstar, aka Mickey, and tries to get an attack going between him and all the rest of his cohorts, when suddenly Skylark says, "I said stop, and I meant it." When she then holds up her hands, there's a huge green flash of light, and suddenly she, along with Wildstar, Mickey's dad, and Jumpstart, are all on an outcropping of rocks out in the desert. At this point, however, Skylark is contacted by a voice that we don't see the source of that simply says her name, and she says, "Uh-oh, I messed up again." And the voice then says, "I'm sorry, Skylark, but you've proven yourself irresponsible and you need time to meditate." Suddenly, she becomes completely corporeal and falls out of the sky, landing directly on Wildstar. Wildstar is like, "What in the world's going on?" And Skylark says, "Oh, beans, I'm solid again." And he says, "Yeah, no kidding. Now I said it again. Or now tell me what the heck is happening." And she says, "Oh, I hurt my butt when I fell." And he's like, No, not that. I want to know what's going on. All this hocus pocus magic stuff." And she says, "Oh, I did all that. I'm actually the in-between of man and God." And at this point, Wildstar is just like, "Oh my God, what are you talking about? What is happening?" As he's completely confused by all of this, as I'm sure many of you watching this are, and I was reading this. And I'm just going to go ahead and give everybody fair warning at this point. This is where the story basically just goes completely off the rails and takes a complete left turn from everything that we've seen up until this point. Skylark then reiterates that she is in fact the in-between between man and God. I don't know if that means she's like an angel, potentially. It's not really too descriptive about that. And Mickey and his dad are like, "What the heck does that mean exactly?" She then explains that she's, from a future, 1,000 years in the future, but that was a long time ago for her, and that she came back to this point, their present, because she's always loved this part in Earth's history, and she thinks that the music and the culture and the fashion is all fantastic, but that in doing so, she kind of messed up and did something thoughtless. Mickey and his dad ask what was that, and she responds by stating that she was healing the sick. They, of course, don't understand how that has any bearing on anything, but she goes on to explain that healing the sick isn't quite the same as other things like traveling through time, and that it has an extra layer to it, because in order for her to heal someone who's sick, that person has to want to be healed in the first place. And she was doing it because she just hated seeing people suffer, and she wanted to try and prevent them from being in pain. And she did have, actual altruistic reasons for doing what she did. Unfortunately, doing this led to a ripple in the space-time continuum, and a cosmic energy that was felt throughout the universe. And it was this energy that was detected by the Rosplar. Now, at this point, Mickey realizes that he recognizes that name, and he states, wait, the Rosplar are the alien race that Michael told me about, who show up and basically start World War III here on Earth. At this point, Skylark says, yeah, that's exactly correct. That is what happened. And unfortunately, they were doing that because they were looking for something special here on planet Earth, and they needed to be able to do it without any interference. So they needed to distract the entirety of humanity with a world war. She then states that while this war was happening, the Rosplar were unimpeded in their quest to find what they were looking for, but the war started getting completely out of hand to the point where it caused the destruction of the entire planet. And she, as someone who really does love Earth, as she states, it's a special jewel in the universe and that there's very few planets like it, and she didn't want to see it die. She needed to find a way to prevent all of that from happening, especially because she herself was the one responsible for the Rosplar ever showing up to Earth in the first place. So Mickey asks, well, what exactly was going on? How did you pull that off? And she responds by stating that she had some help. At this point, we see Jumpstart walking forward saying, hey, look who I found, as she's carrying Hotwire by his collar. And he's like, hey, be careful, I bruise easy. Kind of stating that he's really no warrior and he's not trying to get in a fight with anybody. Mickey then turns and recognizes Hotwire as Andy, the hitchhiker that he picked up in the desert. Andy, aka Hotwire, responds by, oh, you can call me Hotwire, everybody else does. By the way, nice to meet you again. Michael then asks, hey, what is this, some kind of Star Trek convention? How do you guys all know each other? Hotwire responds by stating, oh, we've known each other for a long time, and we know you as well, and we knew we could count on you to help us. At this point, Skylark states that Andy is actually rather gifted, and that he's the one who wrote the memory section of the time machine, and that they figured that would keep everybody else distracted while they went about their plan. Mickey's dad interjects and states, you're kidding me. The memory section of the time machine was brilliant, but the rest of the circuits just seemed like nonsense. And that's when Skylark admits to him that's because that it was total nonsense and that there never really was a time machine. She did that. She's the one that teleported everybody from the future back to the present, and that it happened when she accidentally created the time loop by sending you all back here in the first place. And that even though she's pretty cosmic, she couldn't visit the same time she had already been to because she was already there, and it would cause a real issue in the space-time continuum. But then Mickey's like, wait a minute, then how do you explain how you're here right now? And she states, well, it's not that I can't visit the same place I've already been to, it's that I'm not supposed to because of all of the problems it causes. And that's why the time loop exists, and that's why I've been demoted right now and lost my powers. And it's also what sent out another vibration through the universe that was used to detect my presence here, which is also what led the Rosplar to be able to find Earth. And this is where Mickey and the rest of the gang are starting to have a real hard time following all of this and figuring it all out. Hotwire tries to also help with the explanation, saying that everything all kind of worked out, though, because even though they're stuck in the time loop, it allowed them to come back and try and alert the Earth forces and the Kioans, who were the other alien race that are fighting against the Rosplar, as to the Rosplar coming to Earth, and that this time around, hopefully the Rosplar and the Earth forces will be ready and capable of defending the Earth from the Rosplar. This doesn't sit well with Jumpstart, who says, hold on, give me a minute. You're saying that you're responsible for all of this and that you're also the one who made everyone disappear? Skylark then says, well, no, they didn't really disappear. I just transported them the way I transported us. So she transported General Rourke to Russia, which she then asks, wait a minute, is Russia still its own country or is it the 54th state at this point? I can't remember, implying that at some point Russia becomes the 54th state of America. And that she teleported Deadstar and all of his cohorts to the Arctic ice floes because they needed to cool off. Mickey's dad then completely is like out of his mind about all of this and says, you can't possibly expect us to believe this fairy tale. And Jumpstart agrees with him, stating, yeah, I think this chick has a metal plate in her head. Mickey says, actually, it sounds like a whole China set. But then he starts to try and remove the parasite. And Jumpstart's like, hey, don't do that. You're going to hurt yourself. And he then starts to really freak out and rip at it and tear at it as he's starting to have a bit of a psychological break from all of this. At this point, Mickey's kind of had enough. And his dad is like, hey, are you okay? And he's like, outside of the fact that I'm losing my mind, yeah, I'm fantastic, Dad. But Mickey's dad brings up the point that some of the stuff that they've been told does seem rather irrefutable, and perhaps they do need a different perspective. However, Mickey completely brushes this off and states, no, you know what? This is wild. This is crazy. It has to be a dream. I'm having some terrible nightmare. I'm at home in my bed, and this is all because I ate a large pizza right before I went to bed, and I had a crazy dream. Skylark and Mickey's dad try to stop him as Skylark states this is just the beginning, and his dad says, maybe we just need some time to think, son. But Mickey cuts him off and says, no, Dad, I'm done buying any of this. This is crazy. I'm asleep. I'm in bed. I'm not experiencing any of this. This is all just a nightmare. And you'd think that if this was a dream, I could have also dreamt a zipper to get this stupid suit off of me. Jumpstart then states, oh, you want to get that off? That's really easy. However, if you do it, you're going to be all pink and naked, which is not that big of a problem as far as I'm concerned. Once again, kind of pointing towards her attraction to Mickey. However, at this point, they're interrupted by Skylark, who is saying, you know, Mike, you're being a little bit cranky at this point. And Michael responds by stating, I'm done talking with you. You know, I don't want to deal with any of this anymore because I know I'm alone at home, sleeping in my bed. And in fact, you're not even real. You're just the image of a dream that was brought on by a large pizza. Come on, Dad, I'm taking us home. And then Skylark states, I should have figured you'd be just as cranky and stubborn as the others. I won't let you, do this, Michael. You're going to have to listen to me. I'm the in-between between man and God. And then suddenly, Michael just starts to fly away. Jumpstart says, lady, chill out. Like, he's just a man, a cute man, but just a man. You don't need to get your panties in a bunch. And Skylark states, I hope he comes around, as we see Mickey flying through the air with his dad, stating, look, Dad, see, I'm flying. That means this has to be a dream. Everybody flies in their dreams, right? And Mickey's dad, looking down, states, I'm going to be sick, as things are just kind of going completely haywire at this point in the book. And then, suddenly, we are transported back to the first page of the first issue, where we see Wildstar, aka Michael, I guess it's the same Mickey. This is where like I said, it's confusing, folks. Running through the dilapidated building and trying to figure out, what he needs to do to be able to stop this invasion and get back to the past and find the beacon. But then he suddenly realizes that he's also starting to experience some deja vu, meaning that he's noticing that he's stuck inside of the time loop. And this is the end of the miniseries, and as I stated, it gets super confusing because we find out the entire story that we had been given up until this point was not what was happening at all. The entire thing was all caused by Skylark, and all of it was just a clever ruse to try and fix her mistakes. And that Michael, aka Mickey, aka Wildstar, is the key to solving everything, but it also involves trying to prevent the invasion and Hotwire trying to work with Skylark to get the military to unite with the other aliens who are trying to protect them. And it's like, oh my God, this is so much to try and take in. And the fact that they dropped this on us in the back half of the last issue of the miniseries, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a hell of a setup for the ongoing series, but to try and end a miniseries like this, it's like conflict resolution. I hope you weren't expecting that. And then we get into wild cards and letters, which is the letter section where people wrote stuff in to be answered by one Bill Bud Shakespeare. And holy crap, we're going to get into that when we see the next page. So the problem that I have with the letter section of Wildstar is that it's awful. Now, normally I enjoy reading letter sections as long as there's something to be read there and it's not just them printing nothing but, complimentary letters that they got from people talking about how much they love the book. Or, again, there's the way McFarlane does it where he prints critical letters, but I like the letters where people are getting questions answered, where they're making inquiries about finer points of the story that the editor or writer of the book can then explain in greater detail. And in that case, we do get one letter that does this, where it explains that when the parasites get ripped off of the people, that the parasites don't immediately die. It's dependent on how long the parasite has been on its host and how bonded it is to it. So that's why after Wildstar ripped the parasite off of that guy's face in the first issue, he then had to blast it with his beam to destroy it. And actually, he ripped the one off the guy's back in a later page on that issue and blasted that one to destroy it. The point is, that's why he had to kill the parasites after he ripped them off, because those ones had been latched onto their host for so long, hadn't been latched onto their host for long enough to die instantly when being removed. But for as interesting as that little tidbit was, I had to read through all of Shakespeare's responses to all of these letters. And for whatever reason, Bill Bud Shakespeare has this incomprehensible need to respond to all the letters in like this weird Malibu surfer dude, Valley Girl style of speech, which when you listen to someone talk like that is annoying enough. When you're trying to read it, when someone's trying to spell it out phonetically as it would sound while they were saying it, it is an absolute chore. It's so hard to read when they're purposely trying to misspell words to match the phonetical sound of the word in its mispronunciation and all the weird punctuation that's put on with it. It's so much trouble to read. And for the most part, none of these letters had a whole lot of substance. It was literally just that one answer to that one question. However, there is this cool little picture up here. Now, this is a picture of a little known band called the Ballistic Chicken. Now, if you've never heard of them, join the club. I'm pretty sure most people haven't heard of them. But why it's important is Al Gordon is the drummer. Then we have Jerry Ordway over here on guitar. And the lead singer of this band is none other than Eric Larson, the creator of Savage Dragon. Now, I don't know who these guys are here. They're not named. But the fact that the three of these guys had like a side hustle band that they were performing with is hilarious to me and awesome. I'm so happy. I would love to be able to hear any song just to be like, yeah, do you remember that band that Eric Larson was the lead singer of, Ballistic Chicken? You never heard of them? I would love to be able to hear this band. I guarantee they probably have no recordings, and if they do, it's a horrible recording on like a cassette tape or something. But man, you learn something new every day. I had no idea these guys were in a band together. We're then treated to a few pinups. This first one was by Keith Griffin, the creator of Trencher, as obviously the style would imply. I do like this one. I wish there was a little bit more going on in the background rather than just a big empty skybox, but overall it's a cool pinup. We then get this one by Mike Mignola, who most of you probably know is the creator of Hellboy. However, Hellboy had not been released yet when he submitted this pinup. And it actually states in the letter section on the previous page to keep an eye out for Hellboy in the future, and that was the new comic book coming out from Mike Mignola. So kind of cool that they were giving a shout out to him and what would go on to be a pretty important independent comic book published through Dark Horse. And then obviously there's movies and video games based on the property. But, we see our first kind of glimpse of potentially what was going to be in store for the readers of Hellboy in this first little pinup. As you can see, the big cyber skull Hulk monster has a very similar appearance to Hellboy in his shape and, anatomic layout. And then we also just get like that classic Mignola style with the battle between him and Wildstar. So I was really pretty psyched to see this pinup. The next pinup we see is by a man named John Statama or Statama. I'm not exactly sure how you're supposed to pronounce that, but this one's intriguing as like it's got Wildstar in this battle scene holding a burning G.I. Joe comic outside of a comic book store called the Comic Corner, which is apparently a girl-free geek zone, as it states on the poster outside. And we've got this fat, nerdy dude picking his nose with a shirt on that says fanboy, and another guy crying because the comic book store is on fire. And it seems as though this is potentially an art piece that is supposed to be trying to break the stigma of what comic book stores were perceived to be, and in a lot of ways are still perceived to be to this day by many people. But it is, or potentially that there's a new fandom getting going, which that also is something we've seen since this book was published, how much more mainstream comic books and superheroes have become, in the last 30 years. We then get this final pinup, which unfortunately doesn't have a background, but it's still a pretty cool pinup of Wildstar with the close-up. And this is by a guy named Mike Zeck, who I also don't recognize, but kudos to him. This is a pretty good pinup. I enjoy it. On the final page, we then get image info. Of course, this is just a blurb about what was going on with Image Comics and upcoming comics that were going to be released. Nothing special to talk about there. And on the reverse inside cover, we see a mail-away form where you could order Wildstar graphic tees from Graffiti. And my God, what I would not give to have one of these t-shirts today in an XL so that I could wear it, because they're both awesome. I think Wildstar is a great character. And, the fact of the matter is, I don't know where you would potentially buy a new Wildstar t-shirt, because I don't know how many people care about this character besides me. And that was Wildstar number 4, and that was a doozy of a book. Overall, I feel like it was okay, but that just complete out of nowhere left turn where you find out that everything we thought was going on in the story was completely wrong, and that all of the character motivations were just a complete fiction created by Skylark, was very unexpected and just threw a wrench in the whole flow of the story, in my opinion. Now, listen, I'm not trying to be too hard on Gordon and Norway here, because I understand they were really trying to set up a hook to get people to be invested for the upcoming ongoing Wildstar series. The only problem with that is, as I've stated in previous Wildstar videos, the ongoing series only lasted 3 issues. And that's because Gordon and Orway apparently were butting heads with each other about what they wanted to do with the character and the story, and just came to an impasse and decided, screw it, we're just going to cancel the book and not keep making any more Wildstar stuff. Which is really bad for all of us, because I think that the Wildstar character and story as a whole are very intriguing, very unique in most of its presentation, outside of that whole, when I get angry, I get stronger. It's like, okay, but we've seen that with the Incredible Hulk. Maybe a little bit different would have been a better way to go about that. But again, that's like my one criticism about the character. But, for the fact that you put all this effort into a setup for a story that never gets a payoff, that sucks, man. And again, I've been reading indie books for long enough that I've come to learn that this is a real possibility with any independent comic book that you read, that it just suddenly stops with no conflict resolution. And I wish this one had been different, man. It was so unique in so many things it was doing. And I feel like comic books like this don't come along that frequently, especially from independent creators, in terms of just really taking the superhero genre in a completely different direction than what you would normally see. And also just the way it was presenting the characters too. Like, they were all presented as much more down-to-earth, regular, everyday people, despite the fact that so many of them had these crazy abilities and powers, and, everything seemed discombobulated. It seemed like, Mickey didn't really ever know what he was doing. And honestly, it felt like Dead Star and his crew kind of didn't know what they were doing either. They all had like a similar goal, but none of them really had a concrete plan as to how they were going to accomplish it, which really I felt grounded all these characters a lot more in reality than you would normally see in a lot of comic books, especially comic books from this era. But then again, these are all just my opinions. Your opinions may be completely different. You might have hated this entire series, hated the Wildstar character. Maybe you weren't at all disappointed by that giant, change in what we thought was going on midway through the last issue of the miniseries, and thought it was a great way to set up the story for the ongoing series. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.